Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. And man, do we have a great one for you today. We got a real treat, actually. We have somebody of some note that's really going to help us unravel some super complicated things going on as it relates to the Israel-Hamas war. And that is senior fellow at the Washington Institute, Gaith Al-Omari, who's also a former Palestinian negotiator. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for having me.
We are really grateful to have you because there's nobody more qualified to talk about some of these issues than you are. And we're specifically going to delve in today to what comes after the war. Israel's already talking about, what comes next, the after the war part. And most people, of course, for understandable reasons, are, laser focused on the day-to-day operations and the tactics and all that. And we talk about that a lot, too. But we want to look a little bit deeper today and look and say, however this is resolved at some point, and all wars eventually end, what's on the other side? Because Netanyahu's claim is that his objective, the whole purpose of all of this, is to bring peace to Israel. And as I've been arguing, if you don't have Palestinians don't have peace and Israelis don't have peace, if they don't both have peace, nobody's going to have peace. So to try to figure out, how possible that is, or how high of a hurdle is that to get over, we need to find out, understand a little bit more about on the Palestinian side, who is going to be governing afterwards. And so to kind of set the stage up, I want to show a number of clips for some really senior ranking people of both the United States and Israel have been talking about variously about what's going to come. And you'll see a little bit of discontinuity and conflict going on, and even the concepts. And well, let me just start off here with Netanyahu himself, who is, of course, the prime minister and sets the stage.
Overall military responsibility will have to be in Israel. As far as the civilian management of Gaza, we need to see the following two things. Gaza has to be demilitarized and Gaza has to be de-radicalized. And I think so far we haven't seen any Palestinian force, including the Palestinian Authority, that is able to do it. They teach their children to hate Israel. They're not fighting terrorists.
Now, John Kirby actually says that the IDF probably should not be in occupation duty afterwards.
We don't want to see, and the president has been very consistent on this, we don't want to see a reoccupation of Gaza by Israel. We think that's not only not good for Israel, it's not good for the people of Gaza. So we do not support that. What we do support is some sort of governance in Gaza long term that includes the voices and the votes and the self-determination of the Palestinian people. Now, what does that look like? We don't know yet. We're asking ourselves those questions literally every day as well, and we're going to continue to talk to our Israeli counterparts about that. But we've been very clear, reoccupation of Gaza is not in the best interest of anyone.
Now, National Security Advisor Sullivan, actually just a couple of days ago, came on and actually said that the Palestinian Authority needs to be rehabilitated so that it can potentially play a role later.
We do believe that the Palestinian Authority needs to be revamped and revitalized, needs to be updated in terms of its method of governance, its representation of the Palestinian people, and starting with the president, Mahmoud Abbas, who I will go see. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the Palestinian people to work through their representation, and it will be up to those leaders of the Palestinian Authority to work through the types of steps that they need to take to reform and update the authority for the situation we face today.
Now, however that gets resolved in terms of whoever is going to end up running, President Biden has said his definite objective is a two-state solution.
I made it clear to the Israelis that to Bibi and to his war cabinet that I think the only ultimate answer here is a two-state solution that's real.
Now, unfortunately, you have a senior Israeli ambassador who actually says, yeah, no way.
Is there still a chance for a two-state solution?
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is what type of Palestinians are on the other side. This is what Israel realized
do they
on
have
7th
a state,
of October.
though?
The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then
because
how can
at
there
the
be
moment,
peace?
no,
How can there be
I'll
peace
answer you.
in
The reason there is no peace
Israel
is because the
How
Palestinians.
can, without offering
Mark,
a state to Palestine, how
Mark,
can there be peace in
is
Israel?
So you have the president of the United States saying our strong objective, or first of all, no occupation duty for Israel and a two-state solution. You have Netanyahu saying we're definitely going to be doing a military occupation, at least for some period of time, and their ambassador saying absolutely not on a two-state solution. How do you square those conversations?
You don't. Today, I think the positions are so far apart, and there are many reasons. I think, in many ways, first of all, I mean, Netanyahu himself has always been against the Palestinian state. He said that actually very clearly, just I think a couple of days ago. He reiterated that. And for the U.S., a two-state solution continues to be the objective, even under President Trump. His plan envisioned the Palestinian state. And more than that, if the U.S. wants to build a coalition in support of kind of the day after, an Arab coalition, a European coalition, these countries need to see a two-state solution as an aspiration. We all know it's not gonna happen tomorrow, but at least the principle. And as for the kind of occupation side of things, it seems to me that Netanyahu wants to have his cake and eat it too. He wants to have ongoing complete security control, yet at the same time wants to kind of farm off the civilian side of running things to someone else. Now, I spoke to many Arab and European officials over the last few weeks, and the answer I always get is, why should we come and clean up Israel's mess? Why should we be in a position where we are running things in a civilian matter and Israel can go in and out from a security point of view, making it impossible to do the civilian job, as well as kind of painting anyone who's going to help as a collaborator of some sort. So I think we have kind of today irreconcilable positions.
So let me ask you this. Now, one of your key, I guess, attributes is that you are a former Palestinian negotiator. You have actually, so you really do know how the Palestinians think on these things. You've been actively involved. And I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about what you have done and the part you played, even in preparation for the Oslo Accords, which now Netanyahu says were a complete disaster, but actually laid the groundwork for it, provided potential for hope that you're talking about back then.
Sure. I actually came into the process a bit late in 1999. That was a time where we started talking about what we call the permanent status issues, i.e., how to end the conflict. I was the legal advisor to the Palestinian team and later on became a member. And really what we were trying to figure out at that time is, what are even the contours of what a peace deal looks like? And I think we made a lot of progress in that regard. Yet we learned two things. First of all, if you only talk about diplomatic, if you constrain your conversations simply to the diplomatic sphere, that's insufficient, because the reality on the ground has to match what happens in the diplomatic sphere, and that relates both to the kind of capacity of the Palestinians to run a state, but also Israel's willingness to concede some of its security control. So we have the overall contours, but we never had is really a political reality among the Palestinians and the Israelis, where you had leaders who are both committed and capable of making these tough decisions. And I think we're still stuck in that same paradigm.
Now, I remember maybe you not get the year right, but I believe it was 2013 when Obama came over and made a really big speech in Israel where he really talked up the two-state solution. And I remember thinking that, and I actually rewatched it a few weeks back. And at that time, it really did seem that it was filled with hope, that there was possibility that a two-state solution could actually come to fruition, that there could possibly be a coexistence of the Israeli and Palestinian side. Do you think that was just a made-for-TV moment, or was there actually, as recently as 2013, a future hope that both sides could cling to?
I mean, I would actually take it even a few years back and just, acknowledge that the first American president to actually say a two-state solution is the way to go was George W. Bush, not someone, seen as a soft left-wing president. And his thinking was really based on a concept that the only way, or let me take it a step back. Based on the concept that both the Jewish people and the Palestinians have a legitimate claim to the land, and both have a legitimate claim to have a state of their own. And the only way to do it is a two-state solution. And I think conceptually that continues to be the case. I personally believe that the last time, though, a real two-state solution was a possibility was back in 2009, when Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert was Prime Minister. And at that time, I think the hope was real. Certainly, when I was a negotiator, we worked on the assumption that this is a real possibility. Now, of course, we had some false assumptions. Of course, we made some mistakes, and we have to learn from them. But that continues, to my mind, to be the only solution that gives both peoples the ability to basically express their identities and take charge of their future in a country of their own.
And so, what give us a little bit of a flavor of what the Palestinian people. I mean, let's just not talk about Hamas for the moment, but just the Palestinian people, if there even is such a thing. I don't know if there's a unity of ideas and thoughts anywhere, but as general as you can, what do the Palestinian people want to get in terms of reality? I know that they would love to just have all of their land back, but you talk about the reality on the ground. That's obviously not going to happen anytime soon, if ever. So what is realistic, at least in their minds, that they want?
I mean, look, again, Endgame, the idea, and I think this is the position of the PLO has been since 1988, the PLO is being the non-Hamas faction among the Palestinians, is to basically have a state along the 67 borders, which means basically 23% of what we call historic Palestine, from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, share Jerusalem, have an Israeli capital and a Palestinian capital. As a negotiator, I remember we were very willing to consider the idea of a demilitarized Palestinian state, and ultimately we have to find a solution to the 8 million or so refugees out there. That's kind of in terms of objective. Today, knowing that this is not really a possibility, the least that the Palestinians would want to see is an Israeli acknowledgement that this is a shared end goal, a two-state solution, as well as steps on the ground that both make the life of Palestinians easier, but also indicate that Israel is willing to deoccupy. This position today is not very popular, by the way, among the public in many ways, because the public has lost faith in negotiations and in the Israeli government. Yet, if you go backwards and look at the times that you mentioned, whether it's during the Bush era, during the Clinton era, most Palestinians supported this objective because they thought it was realistic. So the public opinion swings based on their own sense of how credible these kind of positions are. But in the right circumstances, I would say a very convincing majority of Palestinians would be behind something like this, because they were behind something like this in previous years.
Now, of course, now then the situation is insurmountably worse, and for the foreseeable future, not even going to seem like it's even in the realm of possibilities. One of the things that just really jumped out at me over the weekend, there was an article in the Jerusalem Post written by in an interview from one of the mayors of one of the northern settlements right up to the Hezbollah border, the Lebanese border, sorry. And his solution was to basically make another Auschwitz for the Palestinian people, get them all out, and set this up as a sort of like a warning, I suppose, which is about as radical as I believe I've ever heard in print. And yet it didn't seem to cause much of a ripple anywhere. It wasn't in the article that reported the interview. It just kind of says, here's what he said. There was no commentary one way or the other. But that really stood out to me as really stark that some people in Israel, and I don't know how, if it's like just on the fringes, if that's a lot of people are thinking that, but that would seem to undercut much of a chance for even the Israeli side. And we'll look at that for a moment, to even contemplate a two-state solution where they're going to live side by side with the Israelis. How much, or what do you think of that article if you had seen it?
Yeah, I haven't seen the article, but I saw reporting about it. Look, I mean, first of all, I think that kind of very extreme position is still a minority in Israel. Though worth noting that some cabinet ministers, Israel is different from our system. They work on coalition governments, and some members of the coalition, a junior member, yet echo similar thoughts. But if you zoom out a little bit, you'll see that Israel now is really split. And has been for a while. I don't have certain exact percentages, but I would say, roughly half believe that the only way forward is to find a solution with the Palestinians. Today, the word two-state solution is not very popular, but they understand that you have to find an accommodation that gives the Palestinians basically a minimum of what they need. But you have another component, and I would say the current prime minister, certainly the ambassador that you interviewed or that you played earlier, just believe that this is not the case. They believe that somehow they can have a perpetual occupation. And things will be hunky dory. By the way, this is exactly the logic that prevailed over the last 10 years. And, we ended up with very tragic results with the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, seeing what comes out of that. So I think Israel has to also figure itself out. One very interesting point here, I think, maybe counterintuitive, are the ones who believe that you need to have a solution and accommodation tend to primarily come from the security and military establishment, because these are the folks who have seen the cost of the conflict, and these are the folks who know that military means, of course, they're good for certain things, and of course you need to use them, but ultimately without a political intervention, there's only so far that military tools can take you. But bottom line is, I think Israel is split. We don't know how it's going to emerge from this war, but until they figure out where they want to go, I fear that some version of the current conflict will continue going.
Okay, so now let's look back over at the Palestinian side and just look from their perspective in terms of self-governance. Even now, there was a poll out it was reported in Politico last week that talked about how there were, even after all that had happened since the 10th of October, 7th of October, that there were increases in support for Hamas within the Gaza Strip. I think 57%, if I'm not mistaken. But then the bigger surprise to me was that in the West Bank, it's even higher than it was before. And even though Israel has been trying to paint that, all this is the fault of the Hamas, it's their fault that the Palestinian people are being, killed and all these things, but it doesn't seem to be resonating there. So if the Palestinian people, and by the way, that same poll showed that the support for the Palestinian Authority continues to go into the basement, which doesn't, augur well for the U.S. with Sullivan going there trying to talk to Abbas if the Palestinian people themselves don't seem to be supporting that. And so Netanyahu has been categorical, and I think that Israeli politicians across the board agree there will be no Hamas representation in any kind of a post-war scenario. And yet, if the Palestinian people are holding them up higher, they're holding the Palestinian Authority lower. Who's going to govern on the civilian, on the civil side? Who's going to run the show for the Palestinians themselves? Will there be some kind of a new entity, or will they try to make one of these other ones work?
Very complicated question. Look, I mean, first of all, I think as Palestinians, we need to do some serious self-searching, soul-searching once this is over, because there is no doubt that many Palestinians, maybe a majority even, celebrated the heinous acts that Hamas did on October 7th. And so this is something that we need as Palestinians to kind of reckon with, just for our own moral health, if nothing else. Yet, when you look at the kind of, moving from that and look at the political side, today, I mean, Hamas is very popular, and that's not a surprise. And we've seen it in previous wars. I mean, keep in mind that this is, I think, the fourth or fifth, depending on how you count, war between Hamas and Israel. And what we've always seen is that during the war itself, Hamas's popularity shoots up. It's a rally around the flag kind of moment. Yet usually what happens after the war, once people kind of awake from the shock and just start asking Hamas, was all of this worth it? We see Hamas's popularity dips. So that's kind of one data point. Another one, which is always I found interesting, is that Hamas tends to be more popular in the West Bank and less so in Gaza. And it's really a classic case of the grass is always greener. If you live under the kind of very brutal, very corrupt rule of Hamas in Gaza, then of course you hate them and you kind of look on the other side maybe as the savior. If on the other hand you live under the very ineffectual and very corrupt Palestinian Authority, you look at Hamas and say maybe things would be better.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, where we are. There was a poll, I think, that was concluded on October 5th or 4th, just a few days, in which saw that Hamas only has 24% support in Gaza, much higher in the West Bank. But the bottom line to all of this is that today, neither political entities, Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, and its kind of predominant party, it's called Fatah, neither of them have support of the public. If you look at the same poll, you will see that the majority actually will tell you if there's an election tomorrow, will vote none of the above. So you have a sincere, deep kind of crisis of trust between political leaders and their public. Yet at the same time, if there's one thing that Hamas and the PA agree on, is that every time, you know, a third or a fourth or a different political entity starts emerging, they want to cut it down. So there isn't the political space. And while most Palestinians are not kind of happy with either leaderships, there isn't the political space to create something new. And, you know, as we think of what happens the day after, obviously, in the short term, you have to find something. And I believe the Palestinian Authority, for all of its shortcomings, could be it. But in the longer term, we have to focus on how do you create the space for these new voices to emerge? How do you do it? By really working on reforming Palestinian institutions. How do you do it? By, again, ensuring that there is that the security services protect rather than suppress a political space. So these are kind of all the kind of things that we have to look into if we want to have a serious change the day after. Other than that, you know, we're stuck with two bad options.
So what can the Palestinian people do right now? Because whatever one wants to say about what the actual Israeli strategy is, and there's a lot of different views out there. One is what Israel's saying, and one is what Israel's doing, and lots of interpretation thereof. The fact is that all this bombing is making the Strip in large measure almost uninhabitable to sustain normal life, to which you could even then start to have a political discussion. I mean, first of all, they've got to find some way to just live in the area so that they can get basic services back, which I can't imagine will take anything less than multiple years and hundreds of billions of dollars. And I don't even know where that money's going to come from. But it's somehow, first of all, they've got to get this rebuilt. And the question is, do you think maybe that the Israeli position or intent is to make the thing unlivable so that there won't be any kind of political reconciliation and the people will basically stay divided, so that it will be relatively easy for Israel not to have a two-state solution or anything else, because there won't be a partner to negotiate with on the other side?
You know, even before I go there, I mean, I would take it again a step back and say, even before we start talking about this, the immediate priority is to allow for humanitarian goods to come in sufficient amounts. Even before we talk about reconstruction, you know, today it's winter, there are great shortages. Now, when it comes to reconstruction, I can't speak about intent. You know, I don't know what's going on in Netanyahu's head, though I do know that before the war, he was on the record of by saying exactly what you said: keep them divided so we can say there's no one to talk to. Now, if you look forward, though, and you're absolutely right, rebuilding Gaza, which should be the first priority, is a multi-year project and extremely expensive. And if you look at where the money is going to come from, everyone's assuming it's going to come from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, seeing how the West will be really busy with Ukraine and rebuilding Ukraine and all of that. So if you talk to Gulf officials, they will tell you the only way we were willing to come and support that is if they have three conditions. First of all, the Israelis should acknowledge that this is a step towards a two-state solution. Because for those Arab countries, they need to explain to their own publics that we're doing this, putting all these billions in order to achieve a goal which is popular among all Arabs, which is a two-state solution. So that's one. Two, they understand that ultimately only the Palestinians can govern themselves. No one wants to come and take over the Palestinian issue, certainly not the Egyptians, certainly not the Saudis. And so that's why they want, even as an aspiration, to say in the end the Palestinian Authority will become reinstated. But three, and this is very important, they will say they're not willing to put a penny as long as the Palestinian Authority continues in its current format, simply because half of the money is going to be stolen by the leaders. So they want, the Arab countries have paid a lot, and there was a lot of corruption in the past,
Yeah.
etc. They don't want to repeat that, and I get it. I don't blame them for that. So you need these three conditions. Now, when you come and have Netanyahu saying, "No way we have a two-state solution, no way we're going to have the Palestinian Authority come back," what he's doing, in effect, is basically telling these countries is, "We're not interested in you coming in." He said in the past the Saudis and Emiratis will pay for it. Wishful thinking, because they will not do that unless they have assurances that their investment are both politically sound, but also are temporary, and they will not find themselves stuck with this toxic situation.
But see, now that gets us. I mean, we kind of stay in this bad cycle here. That really sort of leads to the conclusion that this is not going to get solved anywhere. Israel is operating right now, claiming, Netanyahu emphatically so, that the objective of all of this conflict is to create a secure and safe future for Israel, so that they don't have to worry about, every 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever, having to fight another war in the Gaza Strip. That's his stated objective, which he said from the outset. But the conditions that you just enumerated there, in terms of, even a rebuilding of Gaza, the political inside of Gaza, the Arab regimes in their conditions, which are completely at odds with what Israel is saying they're going to do, would seem to then to leave the people in Gaza, all the Palestinians, whether the West Bank or in the Strip, still with no even aspiration for a two-state solution. And I can't even imagine that, even if Hamas is completely eradicated, and I don't know how you would do that physically, but let's just say for a moment that it did, what condition does that leave these roughly 5 million people in the West Bank and in Gaza? And will they live in peace, or will there be the risk of a new radical element rising in the ashes?
I mean, look, if there is no hope, then you will not have peace. It's that simple.
I think it is that simple.
I mean, again, and I go back. I mean, as someone, the advantage of age is that I was there in the 1990s, and we saw that when hope was there, people were actually against Hamas. Friends
Good
of
point.
mine who were in the security forces would tell me, the Palestinian security forces would tell me, "You want to go in the 1990s and arrest a Hamas terrorist?" The neighborhood will tell you this is where he is, because they saw Hamas at that time as a threat to their hopes and to their aspirations. Today, there's no hopes and aspirations, so revenge comes in as kind of the prime motivator. The idea that you simply can manage the conflict actually proved that it was absolutely wrong on October 7th. This is what we had over the last decade or so, man trying to manage it with no hope. And this is what we ended up with. I'm not, by the way, excusing what Hamas did. I think what Hamas did was a choice. Hamas is a terrorist organization. What happened October 7th was nothing but terror. Yet it created the conditions for Hamas to be able to recruit and to embed itself among the public. So I think, Israel has to ultimately decide. I mean, as you know, in foreign policy and in military stuff, pardon me, this one, you have to make trade-offs. And unless Israel is willing to understand what the trade-offs is willing to make, what they're doing is simply just maybe buying a few months of maybe a couple of years of quiet. But the question is, do you use this period to build something better, or do we go back to the same cycle?
Well, and that's kind of what my analysis has been for well over a month, or really almost from the outset of the war, is that if Israel genuinely wants to create peace, they're going to have to get to a situation where the Palestinians have something to have hope for. And I understand, and actually, I want to ask you this, a better question, given your experience, because you've had some experience negotiating, so you know what the Palestinian side thinks. You also know what the Israeli side thinks. In this current environment, what will it take for Israel to, whether it's a societal level or a governmental level, to be able to come to the place where they could contemplate having any kind of hope that they could give to the Palestinian people based on all that's happened? Let's look at that half first.
Okay, I mean, I think, first of all, I mean, I would say after October 7th, it makes absolute sense that the Israelis are worried about their security, and I suspect that their kind of security demands will be even harsher than they were in the past. Again, understandable. What happened on October 7th in a small society like Israel leaves a very deep, collective trauma. Look, today in Israel, I would argue again there are, as I mentioned earlier, two camps. If the current camp continues to rule, then I suspect nothing will convince them of being more forward. If the more pragmatic camp rules, and just maybe I have to preface it by saying after the major military and intelligence failure on October 7th on the Israeli side, it's impossible to imagine that the current political constellation will survive. Uh, but we don't know who's going to emerge out of it, something more pragmatic or not. If it's more pragmatic, I believe, again, it may be too early today to talk about a two-state solution in the short term, yet we can start talking about steps that indicate willingness to go to a two-state solution. We should start talking about steps that strengthen and empower the more moderate part of the Palestinian system. The Palestinian Authority is certainly not innocent of its own downfall, their corruption, their poor governance, all that stuff, and that's only on them. Yet the fact is, Israel, when we had a reformist prime minister, a guy by the name of Salam Fayyad, Israel did not reciprocate. So if the new Israeli government decides that if you start seeing the Palestinians taking issues of security seriously, of governance seriously, they start reciprocating, then we can have a virtuous cycle. What we can at least what we can at least do is rehabilitate the idea that cooperation works. The Palestinians do enough to give Palestinians do things that send reassurance to the Israelis reciprocate. We have a virtuous cycle until we get to a point where talking about big issues becomes possible
even. So, but now let's look at the other half of that equation. In the current environment here, Israel is bombing relentlessly, and as Gary's been showing some of these recent images there of building entire sections of cities just wiped out, closing in on 20,000 killed, 50,000 wounded. It seems to me that it might be a bigger lift to get the Palestinian side to be able to have any kind of willingness to cooperate with the Israeli side because of the extreme amount of violence done to them. How do you characterize that part of the equation, and to get back to the point to where even they can have aspirational hopes to cooperate with Israel?
I mean, look, I believe actually after this war, we're going to have a generational issue both among the Israelis and the Palestinians. Both will emerge out of this much, much more traumatized. I actually, when I think of cooperation, I think of it as a very, very functional issue. I don't think of it in terms of, let's say, holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I think of it in terms of what are the core issues that both sides need from one another, and how can we make sure that these are met, whether it comes to security, whether it comes to, that's for the Israelis, whether it comes to kind of easing the conditions of living for Palestinians, etc. Look, I mean, I actually want to take a step back and say, look, when I started my career as a negotiator, I thought of Palestinian-Israeli relations as almost a flirtation leading to a marriage in which we had to cooperate on everything. Today, I think of it as a divorce. What are the core interests that the Israelis need? What are the core interests that the Palestinians need? And how can we work these? So that would require a very functional cooperation. But to think that we will have any kind of societal reconciliation, I believe this might be overloading things, and might be a case of making the perfect the enemy of the good. Today, we need to disengage. We don't need to put unrealistic, noble but unrealistic expectations.
That is so important. I think that, if there's even the hope in the future of having aspirations of some kind of living together, you've got to first get there, and you can't even get there if you don't have a amicable divorce, so that people can actually start to live in some kind of security, which itself is going to be a high road to accomplish here. But this is obviously something that's not going away anytime soon. We are very grateful for all of your insights today. We thank you very much for coming on the show, and this has been so helpful and to at least helping us understand the nature of the challenges ahead of us and, where we might can start to look. And we are definitely going to want to have you back to continue on with this as we move into next phases. And we thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a real pleasure and an honor. I told you earlier, maybe I will not clarify things, but at least give you more of a flavor of some of the even more complexities of this. So thank you.
Conceded. Thank you very much. And that's all the time we have for you today, but we look forward to seeing you. We've got several other shows coming on this week and lots of things to discuss about here. And we're going to remain unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, no matter how hard, because you deserve it. Thanks. Remember to like and subscribe and share with your friends so that they also have access to the truth. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.